This is gonna be a wipe.
Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind, and this is also the 100th Dawntrail day in Mentor Roulette. Wow! And this set was, once again, reasonably mixed, but has quite an interesting finale, one could say. That said, for both Duty 1 and 2, we went to visit Bogman, first as a Dark Knight with only a 1-2 combo, and then as Red Mage with slightly more buttons to press. We managed to get a whole singular enchanted riposte off before the fight ended. For Duty 3, we went to Hades as an instant replacement. Definitely one of the longer fights. A fun fact about the Phase 1 on Extreme back in the day is that there is this mechanic where the boss rains down rune circles that pop for pretty wide circle AoEs, and these can be a little difficult to determine where you need to run to dodge all of them. As is tradition, you can survive one, and at least during Shadowbringers, the solution many parties came up with was to simply stack on one circle spawn location and ignore the rest of the mechanic, as it was simply safer to do it that way than try to dodge all of the circles and accidentally be hit by two. There's also the part that casters were less mobile back then, so dodging everything also came as more of a DPS loss potentially. Now, with that out of the way, in the final phase, we ran into some trouble actually. At some point in the fight, Hades uses Captivity, which puts a spread AoE on 2 random players, and when the cast finishes, those 2 players and anyone in their spread AoEs are grabbed and locked to be saved by what remains of the party. This is usually dealt with very easily, as you just have the spread players run away and the rest of the party continue fighting the boss. Unfortunately, what happened here is that the Scholar slipped on the edge of the arena, and with the target missing, that Captivity cast landed on a completely random player, which meant nearly the entire party was yoinked instead. Thankfully, there is a checkpoint right at the start of the final phase, so it isn't too bad. What really adds length to this fight is the whole transition from the beginning anyway. And yeah, with no one dying suddenly to Captivity, we had no issues clearing the fight on the run back. For Duty 4, we went to Yuweyawata Field Station as Monk, and this went super well as usual, with 0 deaths across the board. On the final boss, during the many circle AoEs, I ran face first into a bit of a realization that some of those circle AoEs are accompanied by an additional center AoE, when I thought it might have been safe. It makes perfect sense it would be there, it just never mattered to me before, so I hadn't considered it. I still survived though, and the rest of the duty went just fine. For Duty 5, we went to Garuda hard as Dancer. What's quite funny is that Dancer's standard finish hits hard enough on secondary targets that you can clear all the plumes off the field in a single hit if you time it right. Unfortunately, the plumes can come in fast enough that you can't do it both times. Our damage was so high here that we almost instantly finished the fight the moment Garuda brought in her adds. For Duty 6, we went to Ultima Weapon Extreme as Gunbreaker. As usual, what really matters here are the orb soaks. On the first set of orbs, Agent Monica goes down, but the orbs are dealt with. On the second set of orbs, Milo goes down, but once again, all the orbs are dealt with. As we ready up for the last set of orbs, I've been deliberately holding all of my defensive cooldowns to be able to help as much as possible with this, as Invuln does not work against these orbs. Moments before the mechanic starts, a healer goes down with low HP DPS on top of that. It almost goes sideways simply due to how unresponsive the orbs are, and I'm pretty sure I had to take both orbs in the last pair, as if just one of them makes it, you still wipe with the other orb resolved, I'm pretty sure. We clear all of the orbs, but make it through with me, 1 near-death healer and 2 DPS, which is plenty to finish the fight first try. For Duty 7, we went to Tower Paradigm's Breach. Again, as an instant replacement warrior, and this run went super well with very few deaths across the board, which meant that we had less of, or outright skipped some of the more problematic mechanics on certain bosses. For example, while we had a few deaths to the forced march on Red Girl, we didn't see the part where she shuffles around the clones doing rotating cone AoEs. A reminder once again that the forced march on this fight starts and finishes before the circle AoEs do anything, and that the forced march will run too fast if you still have sprint active when it happens, so either move into position without sprint, or right click off sprint once you are done moving. I'd say the rest of the duty went even better than Red Girl with extremely few deaths, which led to a clear at like 37 minutes? For duty 8, we went to Wanderer's Palace as Paladin, getting a lot of repeats recently. A really random tip for this duty is that the weird balloon creatures, as always, are ranged mobs. When pulling ranged mobs, there are 2 tricks to keep in mind. The first one is, of course, to bring the melee mobs to the ranged mobs, as the ranged mobs won't be coming to you. The second tip is that if you have ranged mobs that aren't bunched up by default, you can forcibly bunch them up by running away from them, which sometimes means pulling past a pack you normally wouldn't, and then run back to the ranged mobs. This can look very confusing to the rest of the party, but the players that know these tricks know exactly what's happening, and it is better to learn this so you have the trick in the tool belt. Although, to be fair, among Dawntrail dungeons, there's like 1 or 2 pulls where this matters, if at all. For duty 9, we went to M10N, Arcadion's Extremes, as Ninja. It's as if I've been cursed. I always get high-level content when I pick a job I'm less consistent with. Anyway, I didn't really make conscious use of any of this, but Ninja has several actions where it is a gain to use them carefully when the bosses are overlapping. Tenri Jindo, for starters, straight up does its full damage to all targets in range. Dokomori, Kunai's Bane, and Phantom Kamaitachi does this too. This is especially relevant for Phantom Kamaitachi as it has an especially lenient use timing. The weirder ones is that for all Ninki spenders, the frog is better on 2 targets as long as the single target option isn't boosted by Mei Sui. And finally, Goka Mekyaku beats Hyosuranryu on 2 as well. Quite handily too, which I guess is important as we recently discovered that Hyosuranryu is still one of the best attacks in the game for 1 hit. The main troubles with setting all this up is that Ninja's burst, while somewhat flexible, has a bit of a go time to it, that you can't wait for them to overlap, and if they aren't overlapping when it is time for Dokomori and Kunai's Bane, too bad most of the time. But the rotation has enough flexibility that you could, for example, hold Tenri Jindo until they are overlapping a lot of the time. And well, double damage is going to beat the burst window any day. My last tip to you is if you are going to dodge a mechanic with Shikuchi, make sure you don't teleport into the wall. It kills you. Speaking from experience. For duty 10, we went to E6N as Pixomancer. An interesting, somewhat uncommon type of mechanic that this fight uses is the soft enumeration is how I would call it. A mechanic that requires a minimum number of players to be resolved correctly, but if you bring more, that's okay too. A hard enumeration is when it has to be the exact number of players, at least in my mind. With that fun fact out of the way, in phase 1 we had a double kill due to the Garuda cones not being spread out enough. In the Ifrit alone phase, not much happened as players dealt with any potential lethal mechanic correctly. Then when both bosses came in, we had a double kill due to a few overlapping mechanics not being handled very well. One of the tanks actually got a 10-second stun and then immediately died from touching the wall, I think. In the final phase, we started to see a lot more deaths, but overall it seemed like we were holding on well enough. It was a bit scary when the main tank got one of those enumerations on them, but I was paying attention and made my way over to help. In fact, I spent quite a lot of time in the last phase staying near the main tank for whatever mechanics might need a second player, which turned out to be the right move. Despite the surprisingly high death count, we made it through to the end with everyone alive. Now, for a very brief intermission. Initially, I got a 40-minute replacement duty pop as Viper, but when I landed in the duty, I was the only player left facing Thornton Extreme. Personally, I have chosen to not count this duty, as if I'd pressed enter duty just a second later, it would simply have failed to enter anyway. The duty was already abandoned. And on that note, for duty actual 11, we went to Stone Vigil as Gunbreaker. Overall, the duty went very well, although I did find it interesting that it seemed like the healer basically never attacked on AoE pulls. But I might have overlooked something. We were still fine. And it's not like White Mage has access to Holy in this level range, they don't, so it wouldn't have made that much of a difference. Them getting a bit aggressive with the heals may have been outright necessary too, considering their HP suggested they weren't synced down, that's for sure. Still, no wipes and no grave danger, and we made it through just fine. For duty 12, we went to P10N as Viper. By the start, we had some trouble with the webs as me and both tanks all decided to go far north for our webs. Now, admittedly, I could probably have solved this by running for it, but considering our positions, I'm pretty sure the one that could most easily have fixed this was the player in the center, by backing up a bit. Just a bit! Thankfully, we got help to fix all of the web before the next mechanic. Except one of the towers got missed. Then, for the second set of towers, both tanks and a healer goof up and get hit by the follow-up donut. But before the Doom can do anything, Fern dies from natural causes, and by natural causes, I of course mean getting punched as a main tank. This also meant the other tank had to take a few pair tank buster hits alone. Then the next webs caused both our machinist and black mage to get caught way in the back of the arena, and no one noticed to save them in time, leading to their death. But as we pass the halfway point, things start to stabilize. And then for Harrowing Hell, we have 2 deaths once again. But then we finally get things together and clear up the fight. For Duty 13, we went to Dzemael Darkhold as Dark Knight, and the run went just fine. Although, yeah, the healer didn't use Holy even once. Except, right at the end of the duty, not only did it turn out they knew me, but they admitted they, hadn't done the quest to unlock Holy yet. There were a few points where just a single Holy or 2 would have helped immensely though, but we did make it through with the pulls I would normally do anyway. For Duty 14, we went to Over the Shoulder as Summoner. The fight so short that casting Ruby Kabi isn't worth it because Kabi won't be able to punch in time. For Duty 15, we went to Odin as Warrior, and with me just tanking the boss and Ilana healing, this was a very clean run. Although, I was told afterwards that the Bard was chasing Ilana everywhere in the duty. A tip for this fight is that as Odin regularly casts spread AoEs on 3 players at random, that applies an attack speed slowing debuff, it is not a good idea to stack on top of each other. This eventually came back to bite the Bard as they died to a mechanic as the only death. Not that we needed it, but Odin also got stuck in the middle of a mechanic as he passed the DPS check HP threshold, so he didn't start the cast until he was at like 11%, giving us even more of an edge. Quick and easy run. And then for Duty 16, we went to Ramuh Extreme as Black Mage, with Ilana and Fern here too. Turns out, both tanks were first-timers too, but of very different calibers when it comes to listening to guidance. Let me put it like this. The Gunbreaker had convinced themselves that they weren't allowed to ever drop the Shock Strike resistance debuff, and for some reason, that made it make sense to grab all orbs they could. Once it dawned on them that no, actually, you're supposed to alternate who is tanking so that the debuff can safely drop, they massively improved in the fight. The Paladin, on the other hand, heard grab orbs to not die to tank buster, left out the part about how many orbs they needed and everything else, and basically refused to listen to reason for the rest of the fight. And even got hissy about it when I kept pointing out that they were grabbing too many orbs. They listened so poorly to mechanics explanations that they also claimed everyone else was stealing the tank orbs, despite me having explained the whole Rolling Thunder thing at the very start. To put it as simply as I can, the Gunbreaker was trying to understand, but had great difficulty with it. The Paladin seemed to look for ways they could care less about everything, and showed up to the duty knowing nothing, and still chose to be offended when they were explained that they were doing it wrong. Let me put it like this. This Paladin was a piece of work. And this was the day I learned that for French players, the vote dismiss option we see in English as cheating says behavior in French. Why did this come up? Because the Paladin had a vote dismiss pop up for them for cheating. Ultimately, it didn't pass, partly because I hesitated due to seeing cheating, but I think the closest we had was more like harassment. What they were actually doing was one of the more grey areas known as refusing to participate in the completion of an instance, or alternatively refusing to communicate. You pick. Point is, they were being a jerk, and simultaneously making no attempt at dealing with it. I'll get back to this, but with that out of the way, let's go over what went wrong in each pull. Big shock, on the first pull we wiped almost instantly because neither tank knew anything about orbs. On the second pull, we also wiped almost immediately because the Paladin basically just went, "Orbs, got it," and pulled before we could finish the explanation. On the third pull, the Paladin started grabbing as many orbs as they possibly could, which of course made it impossible for the healers to keep them alive. Once the Gunbreaker finally got up to stay alive, they also grabbed as many orbs as they could. I want to underline that I had specified that the red debuff meant they had taken too many. Eventually, we ran into a gridlock because we had Rolling Thunders and no orbs to resolve it, and the tanks needed refreshing their effects too, so eventually they both died and we wiped. On the fourth pull, we once again start off with both tanks insisting on grabbing every orb they see. Which again means that we end up with a Rolling Thunder that can't be resolved, eventually wiping the party. On the fifth pull, I even told the tanks that I was gonna lose my mind if I saw them grab the red debuff again, and wouldn't you know it, the exact moment the Paladin had the opportunity, they got it. And then the Gunbreaker followed suit. And then we had too many players get feared and we wiped. On the sixth pull, the Gunbreaker finally understood they're meant to let the debuff drop, but also both tanks misunderstood and now somehow believed they both had to stand on B at all times. What's worse is that the Paladin kept being like, "I know, buddy," while the information appeared to still go in one ear and out the other, as guess who kept slurping up all the orbs after being told a dozen times to not do that? Fight starts, Paladin grabs 4 orbs. Gunbreaker dies to standing on B. Paladin continues to slurp up orbs, you know, the thing they said they understood they shouldn't do. Once the Gunbreaker got back up, they got their buff running, but we also entered the ad phase, interrupting Ramuh, so we had 2 players feared. We eventually managed to get stabilized again, but as is probably not too surprising, healers are having a hard time keeping the Paladin alive. But eventually, finally, the Paladin lets their debuff drop, but still hasn't got the memo that the red debuff is bad, so they grab 6 orbs at once while continuing to claim they were grabbing 3 at a time. In the final phase, eventually the Paladin dies again thanks to this nonsense tiring out the healers. And the moment they get back up, they start grabbing a ton of orbs again. I wanted to be understood that I explained that the reason a red debuff is bad is because it makes you hard to heal. I explained the reasons, they just chose to not listen and be a jerk about it. And also, let it be known that had we wiped again, I would have been the one to vote kick the Paladin. But somehow, some way, we cleared possibly the second stupidest clear of Ramuh Extreme I've ever been a part of, considering there was that one time with the Chaos Agent. I'll probably put a link to that one in the description if you're curious. Anyway, another 16 duties in the books, and what a way to finish day 100. But please guys, if you don't want some snooty mentor to explain how to do a fight for you, you better have done your homework yourself. Don't be like that Paladin. On the bright side, we've now passed 16 21sts on the achievement. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, back in the day, a legitimate strategy for Ramuh Extreme used a Summoner's Titan Eggy to tank instead of a real tank, as the Titan Eggy innately took so little AoE damage that Shock Strike was livable as is.